My brief exposition will attempt to encapsulate the most important stages of my thesis, which focuses on linguistic relativity and the most important schools of thought that marked the second half of the 20th century up to the cultural turn, which represents a new era in translation studies. Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of the most important philosophers of the last century, wrote this quotation, but the idea that the way we speak and the words we use influence our thoughts has ancient roots. In the first half of the 20th century, the hypothesis of linguistic relativity was proposed. According to this theory, different languages could correspond to a different view of the world and of reality. This hypothesis, also known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, states that the cognitive development of each human being is influenced by the language they speak. In its strong version, the hypothesis explains that the way we express ourselves determines the way we think, and that two people with identical brains could think and reason differently if they learned two different languages. According to Edward Sapir, linguistic relativity is a possible way to explain the need everyone has to use a common language to express personal experiences. Whorf is best known for his work concerning the analysis of the Hopi language, spoken by some native communities in northern Arizona. By analyzing the non-conception of time of Hopi speakers, Whorf believed that the linguistic system of each language was not merely a tool to express ideas, but what formed our ideas. Some of the most important essays on translation theory tend to divide the second half of the 20th century into three periods, which correspond to science of translation, translation theory, and translation studies. Between 1950 and 1960, with the advent of computers and automatic translators, people began to talk about the science of translation. Computer theorists and linguists believed that computers could create a perfect translation. Between 1970 and 1980, linguistic and extra-linguistic aspects were taken into account. The focus was no longer on language alone, but on the text. This change of perspective was anticipated by Eugène Nida, the greatest expert in the translation of sacred texts of the Christian world, who identified a linguistic and an extra-linguistic sphere. A further turning point came in 1980, when the translation process began to be considered as a dialogue between cultures, and the study of translation became a discipline of paramount importance. Translation studies became a discipline around 1976, when André Lefebvre, one of the most eminent translation theorists of our century, used the term translation studies to refer to the vast field of interdisciplinary studies underlying the study of translation. If translating means, as Turi stated, adopting different strategies each time, someone can also reformulate the message in the culture someone is addressing to. This is why Susan Basnet and André Lefebvre refer to translation as rewriting. Lefebvre states that the common definition of translation fails to describe the variety of mediation phenomena which have occurred over the centuries. The concept of rewriting he proposes encompasses all forms of textual manipulation, both for a translation between different cultural systems and for a reinterpretation of a text from the same culture. Translators, therefore, cannot limit themselves to a mere linguistic analysis of the text to be translated, as they must also know the relationships between the text and the system. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize the predominant role that culture plays in the translation process, even though during the early years of the 20th century it was not given such importance. Every translator must take into account numerous aspects that, together lead to translation. I would like to conclude my thesis with this quotation by Umberto Eco, which, in my opinion, encapsulates the true meaning of translation process, because fidelity to the author does not always take into account the culture of the receiving text, and that, as Eco states, among the synonyms of fidelity there is not the word exactitude. Rather, there are loyalty, honesty, respect, and piety.